The sun was already punishing the streets of Manila when Manny Pacquiao drove his car through the city's outskirts. It wasn't common to see him in these parts, but something drew him back to his roots, as if he needed to remember his own story to continue writing new chapters. The luxurious downtown buildings were left behind, giving way to simple houses, some made of improvised materials, so familiar to his eyes that grew up seeing poverty up close. While driving, his mind wandered between memories of the rings, the lights, and the crowds shouting his name. 20 years of boxing career had transformed the poor boy from General Santos City into a world legend. But Manny never forgot the taste of hunger and the weight of responsibility he had carried since childhood. The car slowed down when he spotted a group of children playing improvised basketball with a hoop made of bamboo, and his lips curved into a nostalgic smile. The visit to that neighborhood wasn't planned. It came from an impulse after watching a documentary about boxers he had faced throughout his career. Among so many faces and stories, one in particular stuck in his mind. Datu Samonte, his fiercest rival in his early professional years. The two had fought 3 intense matches that helped define the beginning of Manny's career, before Datu suddenly disappeared from the sports scene, without explanations or goodbyes. Manny's phone rang, reminding him of political commitments he would have later, meetings, interviews, social projects that demanded his constant attention. Being a senator was no easier than being a boxer. It just required different types of strength. Even so, he decided to silence the device. Something inside told him he needed to continue that aimless drive, as if fate was preparing an important encounter. As he turned onto a narrow street, almost impassable for his car, Manny spotted a small crowd gathered in front of a local pharmacy. An elderly woman had fainted on the sidewalk, and no one seemed to know what to do beyond offering water and fanning her face, wrinkled by time and hardship. Without thinking twice, Manny parked his car and walked toward the commotion, not imagining that this small detour would completely change the course of the next few months of his life. The crowd naturally made way when they realized who was approaching. Manny knelt beside the gray-haired woman, whose bony face showed traces of a beauty that time could not completely erase. Her eyes, though closed at that moment, seemed to carry stories of struggle similar to his own. With a gentleness few would expect from a boxing champion, he helped position her better, while someone from the pharmacy brought a small first aid kit. When the woman finally opened her eyes, her confused expression transformed into a mixture of surprise and disbelief. Manny noticed something strangely familiar in her gaze, an inexplicable connection that made his heart race like before a big fight. He introduced himself as he would to any ordinary person, without fanfare or importance, while helping the woman slowly rise with the support of other local residents. Her name was Maricris Amado, as she informed him in a weak but firm voice. She was 73 years old and lived alone in a small improvised structure on the outskirts of Tondo, one of Manila's poorest neighborhoods. She had walked 4 kilometers to the pharmacy to buy high blood pressure medication, but the scorching heat and lack of proper nutrition caused her to faint. When she tried to refuse additional help, claiming she was used to managing on her own, something in the determination of her eyes reminded Manny of someone he had known many years before. The pharmacist discreetly explained to Manny that Maricris came regularly, always counting coins to buy only part of the medications she needed. Sometimes, she brought small bamboo crafts to trade for medicine, a negotiation the pharmacist accepted more out of compassion than commercial interest. The story deeply touched Manny, reminding him of his own mother and the difficulties they faced when he was just a boy dreaming of escaping poverty. Against the woman's polite protests, Manny insisted on taking her home. He helped her into his luxury car, drawing curious looks from residents watching the unusual scene. During the short journey, Maricris remained quiet, looking out the window with a silent dignity that spoke louder than any words. When she finally indicated where she lived, Manny felt a tightness in his chest. It was a small improvised structure made of wood, cardboard and rusty metal sheets, located in an area that frequently suffered from flooding during the monsoon season. Maricris's tiny dwelling reflected material scarcity, but surprisingly, maintained impeccable organization. Small pots with medicinal plants decorated the entrance, and the few pieces of clothing were carefully folded on an improvised bed. One detail, however, immediately captured Manny's attention. On the peeling wooden wall, an old, faded photograph showed a young boxer with his arm raised in victory. Even with the poor quality of the image, there was no doubt it was Datu Samonte, his former rival. Noticing Manny's fixed gaze, Maricris explained with contained pride that Datu was her son. Manny's heart raced with the revelation, pieces of the puzzle beginning to fit in his mind. She continued, relating how Datu had been forced to abandon boxing after a serious injury that private doctors managed to keep hidden from the press. Without the sport and struggling with depression, he had moved to Mindanao, where he worked as a trainer in a small community gym, sending what little he could to help his mother. As Maricris prepared an herbal tea harvested from her own pots, in a demonstration of hospitality that transcended her conditions, she shared fragments of her family's history. Her husband had passed away more than 2 decades ago, leaving her alone to raise Datu. She had worked as a washerwoman and street food vendor to ensure her son could train in boxing, a dream he had nurtured since he was 9 years old, inspired precisely by Manny's early fights that they watched together on a small community television. The irony of the situation didn't escape Manny's perception. While he rose to international stardom, accumulating fortunes and recognition, his former rival's mother fought daily against extreme poverty, without complaining or seeking shortcuts. The dignity with which Maricris faced difficulties deeply touched the champion's heart, who at that moment didn't feel like a senator or national idol, but simply as a man facing a reality that could easily have been his own mother's. Before leaving, Manny discreetly asked if he could help in any way, to which Maricris responded with a serene smile that his visit had already been the best medicine she had received in years. With a lump in his throat, he left a generous amount on the small wooden table, disguising the gesture as if he were just reorganizing his belongings. As he said goodbye, he promised to return to talk more about the old days of Filipino boxing, a promise that, unlike so many made by politicians, he was determined to keep. In the weeks that followed, the image of Maricris's small house and her silent dignity haunted Manny's thoughts. Between Senate sessions and official commitments, he found moments to visit the elderly woman, always bringing fresh food and medications, disguised as small gifts to not hurt her pride. Each visit revealed new layers of Datu's story, his rival who now, ironically, was connected to him by bonds stronger than those of the ring. During a particularly significant afternoon, while helping Maricris reorganize her small medicinal herb garden, Manny heard the complete account of the injury that ended Datu's career. Apparently, during his last training before the 4th fight scheduled against Manny, Datu suffered a retinal detachment that doctors managed to temporarily stabilize. Determined not to miss the opportunity of the most important fight of his career, he hid the condition from everyone, including his mother. But the medical team finally prevented him from fighting when they realized he could completely lose his vision. The revelation hit Manny like an unexpected blow. He had always considered Datu's withdrawal as a lack of commitment or determination, even making public comments about his rival's disappearance. Now, the truth exposed his injustice and prejudice, revealing a man who sacrificed his ambitions to preserve at least part of his vision and continue supporting his mother, even if far from the spotlight and glory he so aspired to. As the days passed, Manny began to notice the precariousness of Maricris's dwelling becoming even more evident. The rusty metal roof leaked during moderate rains, and he could only imagine how it would be during the approaching typhoon season. The wooden walls showed signs of termites, and the uneven improvised concrete floor accumulated water, creating unhealthy conditions for an elderly woman with health problems. Each identified problem increased his determination to do something significant, but without disrespecting the pride and independence that clearly defined Maricris's character. The opportunity arose when, during one of his visits, a sudden storm transformed the small shack into a dangerous trap. Water streamed down the walls and formed puddles on the floor, while pieces of the roof threatened to collapse. Without hesitation, Manny helped Maricris collect her few important belongings, family photos, documents, and some clothes, and took her to a nearby hotel where she could spend the night safely. The elderly woman's initial resistance yielded to the relentless reality. Her home of decades was no longer a safe place to live. That night, staying in a simple but comfortable hotel room, Maricris finally allowed silent tears to stream down her wrinkled face. These weren't tears of self-pity, but of a lifetime of struggles that finally found recognition in the eyes of someone who truly understood the meaning of overcoming. Manny respected her moment of vulnerability, remaining present but silent, offering the kind of company that transcends words. The next morning, after ensuring that Maricris would remain comfortably accommodated, Manny discreetly activated a small, trusted team. Without fanfare or publicity, he organized the purchase of nearby land and the construction of a simple but safe house, suitable for the elderly woman's needs. The project was designed with special attention to traditional Filipino culture, incorporating elements that respected Maricris's roots and her connection to the local community. Everything was done with absolute discretion, away from the eyes of the press that constantly followed every step of the famous boxer and politician. While construction progressed rapidly, Manny dedicated himself to another equally important project, locating Datu. Through personal contacts in Mindanao, he discovered that his former rival lived modestly in a small fishing community, where he divided his time between training young boxers for free and working on fishing boats to supplement his income. Information indicated that Datu's vision had stabilized but remained significantly compromised, limiting his professional possibilities and quality of life. The search for Datu revealed another moving reality. He had never told his mother about the severity of his visual condition or about the financial difficulties he faced. In every letter or rare call, he painted a picture of prosperity and success, even inventing stories about famous students and competitions won. The pride that prevented Datu from accepting help was the same that now kept his mother living in precarious conditions, each silently sacrificing for the other in a cycle of love and dignity that deeply moved Manny. After 3 weeks of intensive and discreet work, the house was ready, a simple but solid construction, with 2 bedrooms, a cozy living room, functional kitchen, and a special space for the medicinal herb garden that meant so much to Maricris. Careful details were incorporated, such as a traditional Filipino veranda where she could sit on hot afternoons, and a small altar for family photographs that survived the weather. When everything was prepared, Manny faced the most difficult challenge, convincing Maricris to accept this gift without feeling she was giving up her hard-won independence. Manny's strategy for presenting the new house to Maricris was carefully planned to preserve her dignity. Instead of simply handing over the keys as a gift, he crafted a narrative involving a government housing program for vulnerable elderly people, of which she would be one of the first beneficiaries due to her age and health condition. The white lie was necessary to overcome the barrier of pride that would certainly make her refuse direct help from someone who, years before, had faced her son in the ring. When Manny finally took Maricris to see her new home, the emotion on the elderly woman's face was indescribable. Her eyes scanned every detail with a mixture of disbelief and silent gratitude, while her trembling fingers touched the solid walls as if she needed to confirm she wasn't dreaming. The space reserved for her medicinal herb garden, specially designed to facilitate cultivation without requiring excessive physical effort, brought tears that she tried to hide by turning her face toward the window, which offered a privileged view of the sunrise. The local community, previously informed about the situation but instructed to maintain discretion, warmly welcomed Maricris to her new home. Neighbors appeared with small traditional gifts to warm the new house, a bucket of rice symbolizing prosperity, salt to ward off evil spirits, and even a small handcrafted altar to honor ancestors. The genuine welcome helped the elderly woman feel part of the new environment, reducing the emotional impact of the sudden change. While Maricris adapted to her new home, Manny finalized the second part of his plan, bringing Datu back to Manila. The task required diplomacy and sensitivity, as the ex-boxer initially refused the invitation, fearing that his visual condition and financial situation would disappoint his mother, destroying the image of success he had carefully constructed over the years. It took a frank man-to-man conversation in which Manny shared his own story of vulnerabilities and fears hidden behind the facade of an unbeatable champion. Datu's journey to Manila was discreetly organized, with Manny covering all expenses, but presenting the situation as a legitimate professional opportunity, a position as a specialized trainer in one of the sports centers supported by his social initiatives. The real job offer eliminated the element of charity that could hurt the ex-fighter's pride, allowing him to accept help as recognition of his technical skills and experience, not as a favor from a successful rival to a colleague in difficulties. The reunion between Maricris and her son took place on a quiet Sunday afternoon, carefully orchestrated by Manny to seem like a coincidence. Datu had been informed about the new house, but believed his mother had been selected for a legitimate government program, with no connection to his former rival. When Maricris opened the door and saw her son standing on the porch, time seemed to freeze. For several seconds, mother and son remained motionless, as if fearing any movement might dissipate that moment they had both imagined for so many years. The embrace that followed overflowed with emotions contained by more than a decade of separation, forced by circumstances. Silent tears streamed down Datu's face, whose eyes, visibly affected by the medical condition, could barely distinguish the details of his mother's aged face. Maricris, in turn, caressed her son's face as if memorizing every new line, every scar acquired during the years of absence. Discreetly, Manny observed the scene from a distance, allowing the moment to belong entirely to those two souls finally reuniting. The days that followed were of adaptation and rediscoveries. Datu finally revealed the truth about his visual condition and the difficulties he had faced, while Maricris shared stories of her daily struggle for survival. The truth, although painful, acted as a balm for both, eliminating the weight of the white lies they had maintained to protect each other. Manny remained present, but always respecting the family's space, intervening only when requested or when he perceived his experience could offer some comfort or practical guidance. The most significant moment of this journey occurred when Datu finally asked Manny, with a voice choked with emotion, why he had done all that for people who meant nothing in his brilliant life. Manny's response came without hesitation. It wasn't the fights in the rings that defined their connection, but the invisible struggles they both waged against poverty, prejudice, and limitations imposed by a system that rarely gave second chances to people like them. In the boxing world, they might be rivals, but in the great fight of life, they were battle companions. As Datu adapted to work at the sports center, he discovered a natural talent for teaching and inspiring young boxers from humble origins similar to his own. His visual impairment, which he initially considered a sentence of failure, transformed into a valuable pedagogical tool. He taught his students to rely more on other senses and intuition, developing a boxing style less dependent on perfect vision and more connected to the holistic perception of the opponent. Gradually, the feeling of shame gave way to renewed pride, no longer based on individual achievements, but on the ability to transform lives through hard-earned knowledge. 6 months had passed since the reunion between Datu and his mother. The house that initially seemed too large for Maricris now overflowed with life, with frequent visits from young boxers who found in the elderly woman a maternal figure, and in her herb garden, natural remedies for minor injuries. What began as Manny's individual gesture organically transformed into a small informal community center, where neighborhood children received not only sports training, but also nutritious meals and educational guidance. Manny continued visiting regularly, but now as a family friend, not as a benefactor. The conversations between him and Datu evolved from reminiscences about their past fights to deep discussions about how to improve the Filipino sports system to detect and develop talent in disadvantaged communities. The old rivalry was completely replaced by a partnership based on mutual respect and the shared desire to create opportunities for young people who, like them in the past, dreamed of a better future through sport. On a particularly significant afternoon, Manny arrived at Maricris's house with a special surprise: the original contracts of his fights against Datu, carefully preserved in his personal archive. Among the documents was an uncashed check from the last match that never happened, the fight that Datu was forced to cancel due to his eye injury. By a contractual agreement, half of the purse had been advanced, but Datu, in his wounded pride, never deposited the check. Now, with interest accumulated for more than a decade, the amount represented a considerable sum that could ensure financial stability for Maricris and allow Datu to expand his work with young boxers. Datu's initial reaction was refusal, accepting that money now seemed like a disguised form of charity. It was Maricris who, with the wisdom of years, helped her son understand that the amount wasn't a gift, but something he had earned with his sweat and sacrifice. The money represented recognition for a career prematurely interrupted, not for lack of courage or dedication, but for circumstances beyond his control. After a night of reflection, Datu finally accepted, with the condition that part of the amount would be used to create a small foundation to assist boxers who, like him, had their careers interrupted by injuries. On Maricris's 74th birthday, a small celebration brought together not only the reunited family, but also neighbors, young apprentices, and some of Manny's close friends who had discreetly been involved in the project over the months. During the simple but warm party, a local reporter who had been invited as a friend, not as a journalist, witnessed the natural and genuine interaction between Manny and the family he had helped reunite. Impressed with the story and respecting the request for discretion, the reporter negotiated the publication of a single report, focused not on the charity of a famous man, but on the journey of reconciliation between former rivals who found common humanity beyond competition. The article, when finally published, caused a national commotion not because of the magnitude of the material help offered by Manny, but because of the simplicity and authenticity with which the entire situation had been conducted. Without cameras, without public statements, without exploiting poverty for image gains, just a man who, at the height of his success and recognition, could still see the value of humility and genuine human connection. For millions of Filipinos who followed every step of their national idol, that silent story spoke louder than any victory in the rings or speech in the Senate, reaffirming that true greatness is not measured by titles or fortunes, but by the ability to see dignity and value in every human being, especially in those whom the world insists on making invisible.
Leave your like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next cases.